Hey guys, this is Pablo with Meditation Amsterdam. Today I want to talk about how it is a particularly good idea to make mind our mother tongue, or at least a language that we speak very, very well. And what I mean to say by that is that it is fairly rare for people to understand what the world inside their mind actually is trying to say, what it means, how to work with it. We normally need coaches and therapists and people who will teach us these things because, ironically, it is not intuitive. The language of the mind is not an intuitive language. In fact, it can be quite the opposite of that, right? If you've been following the channel for a while, and if you haven't, do subscribe, you would know that I talk a lot about things like repression and projection. And so the mind, it does a number of things, and it does them for our survivalistic benefit. But there's a price to pay for a lot of the things that the mind does. And sometimes the price can start to become quite high. So let's take, for example, the way the mind learns. In order to learn, the mind needs to know how to generalize, how to go from a specific instance into a general thing. For example, if as a kid we learn what a doorknob is and how to operate a doorknob, after we've seen a couple of them, the mind generalizes, and from there on, we know how to operate every doorknob, so long as it more or less is recognizable under the category doorknob. If this wasn't the case, we would have to learn from scratch how to open every single doorknob every time around. Right? So it's clear that the mind uses memory and the ability to generalize from the specific to the general, obviously, or from an individual to a category, let's put it like that. In order to do that, what's the price to pay for something like that? Well, if you get bitten by a dog accidentally, the mind will generalize that as well, and all of a sudden you have a dog phobia. Right? It doesn't matter if it was that specific dog or not anymore. You're simply afraid of dogs. So things of that kind will start to happen, right? Or we've heard people say like, yeah, all men are the same or all women are the same. Well, that's taking a few unlucky samples and then judging an entire gender because of it. So that's just a classic example of what the mind will do. But the generalizations and distortions and omissions of the mind are child's play in comparison to the kind of confusion that our mind will create when it starts to repress and project. That's a different order of confusion altogether, actually. It is almost like Orwell's 1984, I think it was called Double Talk or Double Speak, something along those lines. It was government propaganda language specifically designed to veil the truth, right? And that is exactly what's happening inside our mind. We have a 1984 regime within the mind, so long as the ego is in charge. How does this happen? Well, we have to remember that in our early years of age, our mind is primarily tasked with making sure that we comply to our caregivers enough so that they will continue to take care of us, both physically and emotionally, right? So learning that compliance is done very, very quickly. We're very pliable at that point. And we're not really there to question whether what they like is good or not. We simply mold ourselves into that. But what then starts to happen is that the mind from there on makes it its task to veil everything in our internal and external reality that contradicts the view of the world that we've been programmed to believe, or that's been instilled into us, and that we have all too happily adopted, so that our life is not in shambles. Now, that's where projection and repression start to come in. We start to have contentious thoughts about ourselves or about others without knowing that they have been entrained. They feel like our thoughts. They truly do. We've adopted them. It's becoming our identity. And those thoughts serve as protectors that we stay within the coloring within the lines, so to speak, right? We don't want to overstep those boundaries, because then we get punished by affects of guilt, shame, fear, and things that we don't want to feel. So we are constrained then to operate within certain boundaries. But all of this is seen as, well, that's just who I am, or well, that shouldn't be done. And we create great philosophical or thought-based models of the world to defend what is, when looked at closely, a completely fear-based system. Yeah, it's a punish and reward-based system. But we can't see that. Repression is a hidden mechanism. It hides not only what it's hiding, but it also hides itself. And this is when learning to speak mind becomes so damn important. Because unless we do, the mechanisms of repression that were geared to keep us safe, and which created a certain armor around us, a kind of mental veil, actually that armor eventually becomes a prison that we can't break out of, because we can't even see it. We can't know that it's there. We believe that we think in certain ways and hate certain types of people or situations, or desire certain types of people and situations, when in reality we are dancing to the tune of a repression mechanism that is veiling unfelt fear, in essence. It takes a while to concede to the fact that every compulsive thought in our head is hiding a fear that won't let itself be seen. That every crucial decision or dilemma that we encounter in our lives is doing exactly that same thing. And so it takes quite a bit of practice and understanding to hold ourselves to not so much a higher standard, but a different standard. In the sense that lying is our default when we are in ego mode. The ego is a lie. It is the lie that there's an individual separate self, and the lie is preserved or preserves itself by having us face tremendous shame or fear or guilt whenever we try to break out of it. So it won't let itself be caught, and for good reason, because that was the lie that we needed when we were younger. When we are young, we need to kid ourselves into being a certain someone that we may survive and retain our sanity. But that lie festers inside. And when we come to the spiritual endeavor, we may as well assume not only that lying is our default, but our very identity is a lie. We are a lie in some sense, in a very fundamental sense too. This is not a banality. This is very fundamental indeed. And from that perspective, when I say that we don't need to hold ourselves to a higher standard but to a different one, I mean to say that because we are coming from lying, it's not so much that we need to be ashamed of that and do a mea culpa or anything of the like. We need to train ourselves to recognize truth. We need to train ourselves to embody truth and to value truth. Because when you are a lie, when you have identified yourself with a lie in a system based on fear, truth seems not only very scary, but it also seems rather pointless. It's like, why would you go through all that emotional pain if you can tell yourself this phenomenal lie of this person that you are, who has control and the rest of that kind of good stuff. So it's a re-entrainment to reorient our attention in the search for what is actually up. And as such, as I said, it's not so much that we want to learn something better, but rather start to understand that this was wrong all along, and to see it for what it is, to actually discover that not as a moralistic discovery or a philosophical one, but experientially. To notice experientially that every time your head starts to go in a circle, there's something that you're afraid of. To recognize experientially that whenever you are really angry about something seemingly small in your life, that a nerve has been hit, which goes to the very essence of your fear of vulnerability or abandonment or insignificance or death, or you name it, loneliness, right? These things run very, very deep. But our minds are experts in doing all kinds of somersaults and acrobatics to prevent us from seeing that and from acknowledging it. So the move towards truth and discomfort has to come from a different place altogether, right? It's not the lying ego who will be convinced that this is any good. It's something else, a kind of desire to come home, because that world of the ego is so brittle and eerie and unreal, and it never offers satisfaction or answers, right? So there comes a point where it's just that the payoff is just not good enough anymore, and that's when truth starts to acquire a certain appeal, and we start to become progressively willing to sacrifice comfort in search for what's actually going on. But to be able to do that, we need to be able to speak the language of the mind so that we know what kind of truth it's trying to communicate to us. Because behind every lie of the ego sits a truth ready to be discovered by someone who can discern how to use the lie to arrive to that truth. So whenever our thoughts are going on in a circle, if we have enough presence of mind, which can be cultivated, so the willingness and the appeal for truth and truthfulness is a cultivatable skill. Head starts going around in a circle, thinking loops, overthinking, and we go, this means fear. Fear of what? Let's take abandonment as an example that I've experienced as of late with my little old cat, which you might have seen walking behind me. She's now very old, and her time will probably be coming soon. And I noticed this is really getting to me. And of course, it's been a companion, and animals that live with you, we tend to grow very close to them. But it hits something very deep, and it's the notion of homeliness and companionship and the fear of what that absence will feel like. It'll feel like loneliness, right? Or something of the like. and to allow ourselves to understand that whatever upset we may feel on a surface level, on whatever the topic may be, always leads deeper and deeper, ever getting closer to the very center of our heart. And that's the language of the mind. The language of the mind is feeling. Feeling is the language of the mind, as a matter of fact. It's not thinking. But thinking is the mind's PR agent, right? It's the advertising agency or the marketing bureau of the mind. It goes like, oh, here's all this advertising. Look at this, look at that, look at this. Think about this, think about that. And all the while, the real action is happening behind the scenes, and you want to get that. You want to get there as well. And in order to do that, you want to be able to learn the language of the mind. What does overthinking mean? Is the content of overthinking its value? If you learn to speak mind, you will know that the content of your overthinking is completely vacuous of value. But the fact that it's there is not vacuous of value. The fact that it's there means that there is value to be found if you point your attention elsewhere. And the same goes for when we become critical of someone. The same goes when we become critical of ourselves, right? So most mental rumination or emotionally laden activity of the mind is pointing to something, and we want to learn to speak mind so as not to get bamboozled by the fireworks and the overactive mind, and follow the trail back to the source and the sense of self and the fear that we're reluctant to feel, or that we may not even be aware that is there. So this video is intended to invite you to become ever more proficient in making mind your mother tongue, learning to speak the language of mind, which is a language of feeling and sensation, and to understand how to deal with thought, which is to simply use it as an indication pointing towards something that needs to be resolved. And if I remember to do so, I will make a follow-up video about what that process looks like, why it is typically called in some schools an alchemical process, and what is the difference between what you could call a civilian or a general population type of person and an alchemist. And I'll dive into that hopefully in the next video. Thanks for listening so far. I'm curious to hear your comments about this one. And if you think it's worth liking, sharing, and subscribing, then do so. I'll be back with more videos pretty soon. Cheerio. Bye-bye.